Hey, and welcome back to another Learning Java 2D Game Programming video. So in our last video, we added a input component so that we can input some text into our game. And it's very simple at the moment, and I'd like to expand a little bit upon it. So that's what we're gonna do today. We're gonna add a very simple little cursor using things that we already have, not to make it too complicated. And we are also going to see if we can't make this input only accept numbers. So yeah, that's the goal. Let's get to it. So I'm going to find the UI text input class. Here is that, and we're going to need some more things. So the way that we're going to do this cursor, if we start with the cursor, we are gonna sort of cheat a little bit. So we're not gonna store an index of where our cursor is, but rather, since we know that the cursor is just one, and there are things coming before the cursor and there are things coming after the cursor, we're gonna make use of that. So we're gonna keep two strings, that is the precursor value and the post-cursor value. And so when you press backspace, for example, then we know that it's the precursor value string that we want to remove a character from. And in the same way, when we write something or type something on our keyboard, we know that it's the precursor value that we want to append this character to. So that's what we're going to do. So we need two strings. Precursor value and post-cursor value. Great, so we're also going to need some sort of visuals for our cursor, and we're going to make it a container that we will only make 1 pixel wide. All right, so let's just start by initializing the precursor value to an empty string and the post-cursor value as well. There we go. And then we have our cursor. So I'm gonna make that here. It's a new, let's make it a vertical container. Let's give it a fixed size of 1 pixel wide, and I'm going to make it 25 pixels high. And sorry, cursor, we're going to set margin to 0 and also padding there. All right, so now when we update, we first check if we are active. Or rather, first we check if it isn't null, and then we check if we are active. So if this text input is the active one, then we want to be able to show the cursor. So I'm going to say get time seconds dividable by. So every half second, I want to switch the visibility of our cursor on and off. So that means I want actually a Boolean up here as well. We need to store whether it's currently visible or not. So I'm just going to keep a Boolean cursor visible. All right. So every half second, I'm going to say cursor visible is equal to not cursor visible. All right. And then we want to set the background color of our cursor container. So let's check. If it is visible currently, then I want it to be white. If it's not visible, I want it to be actually transparent, but in order to do that, we need to define a new color. So as long as this is 0, the rest is fine. So if it's not visible, it's invisible, and it's white otherwise. Great. So now comes the big change. This is where stuff is going to change a lot. So we're no longer going to need the get current value because we are going to have the precursor value and the postcursor value to use first. And then down here, we're going to set it to precursor value plus postcursor value. And then when we do that, like over here, we're not going to use the current value anymore. We're going to first give it the precursor value, the postcursor value, and in between, we are going to give it the cursor. Like so. So that's going to work like that. But now we need to change all of these key stuff. So the first one, backspace, just like we talked about before, this will be the precursor value. So if it's not empty, then let's set it to a substring of what it was, where we just take away the last character. And if we press space, then we want to add the space to the precursor value. And then I want to add a couple of more of these. So a couple more else if statements. I'm going to check VK left. So that's the left arrow. And what do we want to do if we move to the left? Well, we want to shift one of the characters over from the precursor value to the beginning of the postcursor value. All right, so we are going to do it like so. We first need to check if not the precursor value is empty. Because if it's empty, we're going to get a null pointer. So if it isn't empty, then let's make sure that postcursor value is equal to precursor value substring. And we say precursor value length -1. So we only want the last character. And then let's add whatever the postcursor value was before. And then the precursor value, we need to take that away. So that will be a substring starting at 0 and going on until precursor value dot length -1. All right. So what will happen when we press VK right? Well, the opposite. So I'm just going to borrow this. But now we want to make sure that postcursor value isn't empty. So let's start with precursor value, and precursor value we will actually just add. So let's use this shorthand. Precursor value will be what it already was, plus the postcursor value substring start at 0, go on until the first one. So we're just taking the first character and appending it to the precursor value. And then let's do, I'm just kidding. All right, so this will be the postcursor value substring starting at index 1 and going on for the entire length. So that should be it for that. And otherwise, we are adding to the precursor value. All right, so let's see what this looks like. Let's see if it works. Okay, as you can see, we have a cursor. It is blinking in and out, and we can move it and delete and add inside. So it is shifting it's shifting the letter that it's at by 1 pixel, but I'm fine with that. So this was an easy way of doing this with components that we already have. So I am happy with this. Now let's see if we can't make this input only accept numbers. All right, so the way that I think that I'm going to do that is I'm going to introduce something called a transformation method. So it's going to be a unary operator, which is a functional interface that takes an object of some type and returns an object of the same type. And well, then you can do whatever you want inside of that operator, of course. So I'm going to have a unary operator. It's going to be a string. I'm just going to call this transformation. So I'm actually going to make another constructor. So I'm going to start by doing just actually this. So like the constructor that we already have, but here we're going to add that unary operator string transformation, and we'll let the regular one call this, pass on the label, the value, and as a default transformation method, let's just say string return string. So we could probably say value just to be, or actually value will collide with this name. Let's just call it, what do we want to call it so that we understand what this does? I mean, we could call it string with a lowercase s, so that will just be the variable name. And this is just a lambda that says we are passing in a string and we are returning the string. We're doing nothing with it. So by default, we are doing no transformation to the value inside of our input. Let's just say that this dot transformation is equal to transformation, and then we also have to use it. And I think I'm gonna transform our precursor value and postcursor value after we have added stuff, but before we set the value. So precursor value is equal to, let's see, transformation dot apply precursor value. Let's just duplicate that and do it for the postcursor value as well. All right, so now you could actually give this any sort of transformation method that you'd like. As long as it takes in a string and gives back a string, you could really give it any method at all. And I'm actually going to make a new class that I'm going to call UI number input. And we don't have to do this. We could just use the UI text input and give it that method. But I feel like a number input is probably common enough that it can have its own class, and it'll be easier to read inside of the class where we define our UI. So I'm just going to say it extends UI text input, and I'm going to create a constructor. Yes, so the constructor is going to take in these things, but we're going to add on a transformation method that will strip away everything that isn't a number. So I'm going to say string, and now comes whatever we're doing. So we're returning that string, and then I want to do replace all, which takes a regular expression and then what that should be replaced with. So the regular expression is defined within these quotes. So I'm going to say that everything that does not begin with, and we need to escape the digit. So this matches everything that is not a digit. Just replace that by an empty string. Replace it with nothing. So this will just strip away everything that isn't a digit and only leave our digits. So this should hopefully work. If we go to where we define that UI, which will be inside of the menu state, UI game mode menu. So here we have the UI text input. Let's just make that a UI number input. All right, so I'm first gonna see if, yeah, so I cannot write any letters, but I can type in numbers. All right, that seems to actually work just like I want it. So that's great. So we have a cursor and we have limited our input to only take numbers. So yeah, I am happy with that. Just gonna check how much time we've used. So 15 minutes. I'm just gonna make some quick little UI changes. I think that I sort of like not having so much gray that I'm currently using. In here, it's a lot of gray. So I'm just gonna try not using these gray backgrounds. And I want this to be a header. We have the UI header component now, so our ISO bubbler really should be a header. So just gonna make some UI changes. All right, so the first thing I want to do is make this a UI header. Great. And I might want to move this out a little bit as well. I'm gonna do refactor, introduce variable, and say header. And the reason I want to do this is because I want to be able to set some, I'm gonna set some padding. So I'm gonna have 0 for top, 0 for right, 50 for down, and 0 for left. And this is, of course, a spacing. There we go. All right, so I'm going to see what that looks like, but I also don't want this to be dark gray. So I'm just removing that. Just going to check that out. All right, so I do like that this is a header, and I don't think I missed that gray background, but it's all been shifted downwards. So the way that I think that we can handle that is if we also give a bottom padding for this parent container. So I'm just going to say set padding, new spacing. I'm going to do the same. So hopefully this will shift it upwards the same amount. And I think it did. Okay, good. So I think this looks better. So I'm more happy with this. I'm gonna take away and make this look the same. I'm gonna take away the dark gray background. And I actually think I'm gonna take away this label for now. We can always add it back in if we preferred it, but that's what I will do, which means we don't need the label container, so we don't need to add it. We don't want the content container to have a dark gray background, and you don't have to do this if you like it the way that it looks. I'm gonna see what this looks like. All right, so I think this is visible enough that we don't need the dark gray background. You can still see it and use it as it is. All right. So one more thing that I've been thinking about is it's very choppy when we move, or choppy. It just happens instantaneously, and it would be nice if we could have some sort of, I don't know, fade in effect maybe. So let's see if we can add a quick fade in effect. Let's see, if we do it to the UI container, then it should apply to all of our containers. All right, so maybe we'll say something like, let's have a float opacity. All right, and this will be 0 by default when it is loaded in. And then in the update, let's just check if opacity is less than 1, then let's add some opacity. How much do we want to add? 0.05 maybe? We can at least try that. Actually, let's do math.min opacity plus 0.005. So if we choose to change that, we don't have to think about whether it will exceed 1 or not. So there we go. All right, so if opacity is less than 1, then we are adding sum to that opacity, or we're setting it to 1. Great, now we need to use that somehow. So we are generating the sprite over here, and where we say get sprite, we're just returning the sprite. But right now, I'd like to know if opacity is less than 1, then I don't want to return the regular sprites. I want to make a new sprite. So let's just actually copy the generate sprite stuff for now. We're going to use this. So we want the sprite, the image, but we want it to be with an opacity. We want it to be not entirely opaque. So I'm just going to say image to transparent, or sprite with opacity is probably a bit more descriptive. So that's going to be sprite with opacity, get graphics. Also, we want it to be alpha blend. So we're getting the graphics. We are setting background color, and we're drawing stuff on top of that. Actually, we don't need to draw every single component inside children because we have the sprite. So let's just use the sprite, which means we don't have to do these things either. What we do have to do is set composite. And I think it's called alpha composite source over. Is that it? Derive float alpha. Actually, we want source over derive, and this will just take that opacity value. So we basically told our graphics how should you draw, just like we do when we set a color or anything. We're just saying that next time you draw, use this rule for the alpha. All right. So now we just want to draw our sprite to this sprite with opacity. Of course, graphics, draw image, and let's do sprite. And it starts at 0, 0, and we don't have an image observer. And then we are disposing of that graphics. Let's just return this sprite with opacity. All right, so if opacity is less than 1, we are drawing the sprite that we have onto a new image, but with some opacity value. And hopefully that's enough. Let's just check if it is. Okay, just stop to check where the mistake was. And it was obviously here. We can't add. We are adding the value of opacity twice. So that was not supposed to be there, of course. So there we go. And math min, it gives back a double. So just set opacity to min opacity, and that means that this can probably be a bit higher again. I wonder if that's good. All right, so this gives a little fading effect. I think I'm happy with that. There are, of course, many things that we could do with this fading effect, but actually, maybe we do want to set the opacity to be right. So when I tried this before, I just tried setting the opacity, but let's just start at some value so it doesn't start from absolute nothing. I'm just going to try that. All right, so it's a very quick little fade in effect, but I feel like it does make it a little better. So this is flickering. Oh, I know why. It's because of this cached sprite. So in other places, we create new UI containers every time we show something, but in that menu, we don't. Let's just see if we can fix that real quick. When we are toggling the menu, when we're adding the game menu in, we want to reset it. So I'm just going to say game menu dot fade in maybe. And let's just make sure that this, let's put it in the UI container so we always have access to it. This is going to set opacity back to that initial value so that we are fading in. And I don't think that that will necessarily be enough, unfortunately, because it still has that old sprite that it has cached. So we're going to have to force it to redraw its sprite after we've told it to have a smaller opacity. So, all right. So here is how I changed it. We need to also generate the sprite so that we update the cached sprite that we have. And before we do this to this parent component, we need to check all the children that are also UI containers and make sure that they do it as well. All right, so this is better. It looks a little bit more uniform now. It doesn't flicker or anything. So I am gonna let that be that. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Hej då!